I pulled my truck into what should have been my driveway in Columbus, Georgia, and my heart stopped when I saw rows of identical beige houses where my 20-acre property used to be. 4 years, I had been deployed overseas with the Army, and I came home to find my land transformed into a suburban nightmare of cookie-cutter rental homes that I never authorized anyone to build. My name is Marcus Bennett, and I had purchased this property back in 2018 with my deployment savings, a beautiful piece of land on the outskirts of Columbus near Fort Benning. It was supposed to be my retirement plan, my future, the place where I would build my dream home when I finally left the service. I had set up automatic payments for the property taxes through my bank before I deployed, made sure everything was legally squared away, and left with the peace of mind that my investment was secure. Now, staring at 33 rental homes complete with mailboxes, driveways, and landscaping, I felt my blood pressure skyrocket. I parked on the street because I could not even access what used to be my property entrance. A decorative sign near the front read Oakwood Meadows Community, with smaller text below stating managed by Pinehurst HOA. I sat in my truck for a solid 10 minutes trying to process what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe I had gotten the address wrong after being away so long. I pulled out my phone and checked the property records I had saved. No, this was definitely my land. The GPS coordinates matched perfectly. A woman in her late 40s with that distinctive haircut, short and asymmetrical with blonde highlights, came power-walking down the sidewalk with a small dog on a leash. She stopped when she saw me sitting in my truck, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. I rolled down my window. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone already dripping with accusation. "This is a private community. If you are looking for someone, you need to check in at the HOA office." "I own this land," I said, stepping out of my truck. I was still in my Army uniform, having come straight from the base after processing out. "My name is Marcus Bennett. I bought this property in 2018. Her expression shifted from suspicion to something that looked like panic for just a second before she composed herself. "I am Susan Caldwell, president of the Pinehurst HOA. I think you are confused. This development has been here for over 3 years. We have all the proper permits and documentation." "Documentation for my land," I felt my voice rising. "I never sold this property. I never gave anyone permission to build anything here." Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. "I suggest you contact our HOA office during business hours. We open at 9 tomorrow morning." She handed me a business card from her pocket, which seemed way too convenient, like she had been expecting this conversation eventually. "All of our paperwork is in order, I can assure you. This community was built in full compliance with county regulations." She walked away before I could respond, her little dog trotting beside her. I stood there on the street, looking at the business card. Pinehurst Property Management with an address in downtown Columbus. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from pure rage. Someone had stolen my land and built an entire neighborhood on it, while I was serving my country overseas. I spent that night in a hotel room, barely sleeping, going through every document I had saved digitally. My deed was clear. I owned 20 acres, purchased outright, no mortgage, no liens. The property taxes had been paid automatically every year from my account. I checked my bank statements and confirmed that the payments had gone through like clockwork. So how the hell had someone built 33 homes on my property? At 8:45 the next morning, I was sitting in my truck outside the Pinehurst Property Management office. It was located in a small commercial building with mirrored windows and a parking lot that needed repaving. The moment the lights came on inside, I was at the door. A younger woman, maybe mid-20s, unlocked it and seemed startled to find me waiting. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "How can I help you?" I need to speak with someone about the Oakwood Meadows development, I said, keeping my voice level. I am Marcus Bennett. I own the land that development is built on. Her eyes widened. Oh. Let me get Mrs. Caldwell. Of course Susan Caldwell worked here. She appeared from a back office within minutes, her expression much less friendly than it had been yesterday once she had time to think. Mr. Bennett, I was hoping you would come by. Please, have a seat in my office. I followed her into a small room with a desk covered in files and a window overlooking the parking lot. She closed the door and sat down, folding her hands on the desk. I am going to be completely honest with you, Mr. Bennett. We acquired this property through a tax sale in 2020. That is impossible, I said flatly. I have bank statements showing my property taxes were paid every year. Let me show you something. She pulled out a file and slid papers across the desk. In 2019, the county changed the parcel number for your property due to a rezoning. Notices were sent to the address on file, which I assume you were not at since you were deployed. When the taxes went unpaid under the new parcel number, the property went to auction after the required waiting period. Pinehurst Properties purchased it legally in 2020. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I was paying taxes. My bank has records. On the old parcel number, Susan said, which no longer existed. The county tried to notify you, but mail sent to your property address was returned as undeliverable since the land was vacant. Did you have a forwarding address set up? I had not. I had used my bank's online system to pay bills automatically, and I had not thought to set up mail forwarding for an empty piece of land. This could not be happening. Even if that is true, I said, fighting to keep my composure, the amount owed in back taxes would have been maybe $2,000. You built over $1 million worth of homes on this land. We purchased the property for $18,000 at auction, which covered the back taxes and fees. We then invested approximately $3 million in development. All legal, all permitted, all documented. She pulled out more papers. We have environmental assessments, building permits, utility easements, everything. I want to see proof that you tried to contact me, I demanded. Susan pulled out yet another file. Inside were copies of letters sent to my property address, returned by the post office marked Return to Sender, unable to forward. There were also copies of a legal notice published in the Columbus Ledger-Inquirer, the local newspaper, announcing the tax sale. Everything looked official. This is fraud, I said. Someone changed my parcel number and set this up to steal my land. That is a serious accusation, Susan said, her voice hardening. The county rezoned that entire area. Dozens of properties were affected, not just yours. This was not some conspiracy against you personally. Then why did my tax payments not get redirected? Why did the county not contact me at my banking address? You would have to take that up with the county tax assessor's office, Susan said. As far as Pinehurst Properties is concerned, we purchased land legally at a public auction and developed it according to all regulations. We have done nothing wrong. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Get a lawyer, Mrs. Caldwell, because I am not letting this go. I walked out of that office and drove straight to the Muscogee County Tax Assessor's office. The building was typical government architecture, bland and bureaucratic. I waited in line for 20 minutes before reaching a clerk's window. I need information about a property tax issue, I told the clerk, a tired-looking man in his 50s. I gave him my original parcel number. He typed on his computer, frowned, typed some more. That parcel number was discontinued in 2019 due to rezoning. It was split into 3 new parcels as part of the Fort Benning expansion rezoning project. Why was I not notified? I asked. Notices were mailed to the property owner at the address on file. Were you not receiving mail at that address? I was deployed overseas with the army. The property was vacant land. The clerk's expression softened slightly. You should have updated your mailing address with our office. When the letters were returned, we published legal notices in the newspaper as required by Georgia law. After the mandatory waiting period with unpaid taxes, 2 of the 3 parcels went to tax auction. 2 parcels, I asked. What about the third? More typing. The third parcel, about 6 acres, still shows you as the owner. Taxes are delinquent, though. You owe approximately $4,000 in back taxes and penalties. At least I still own something, even if it was only a fraction of my original property. What do I need to do to pay that and make sure my mailing address is correct? I can help you with that right now, the clerk said. I spent the next hour updating my information and paying the back taxes on the remaining 6 acres. The clerk printed out maps showing how my original 20 acres had been divided. The 6 acres I still owned were at the back of the original property, the least desirable section because it bordered a drainage easement. The 14 acres that had been stolen from me, the prime buildable land, now housed 33 rental homes generating God only knows how much money for Pinehurst Properties and their precious HOA. From the tax office, I went straight to a law firm. I found one that specialized in property disputes, a small practice run by an attorney named David Richardson. His office was in a converted house near downtown, the kind of place that felt more approachable than the big glass tower firms. Richardson was in his early 60s, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had been practicing law in Georgia for decades. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally taking notes on a legal pad. "This is complicated," he said when I finished. The tax sale was likely legal if proper procedures were followed. However, the fact that you were actively paying taxes just to the wrong parcel number due to government rezoning creates an interesting situation. "Can I get my land back?" I asked. "Maybe." Georgia law does allow for setting aside tax sales in cases of improper notice, but you were given notice through the newspaper publication, which is generally considered legally sufficient. The stronger argument might be that the county's failure to properly redirect your tax payments or notify you at your banking address constitutes a due process violation. "What about all those houses they built?" I asked. "That is where this gets really interesting," Richardson said, leaning back in his chair. "If we can prove the tax sale was invalid, then Pinehurst Properties has been operating on your land without permission. You would be entitled to compensation for the unauthorized use of your property. 4 years of rental income from 33 homes would be substantial." "How substantial?" Richardson pulled out a calculator. "If each home rents for an average of $1,200 per month, that is about $15,000 per month total, or $180,000 per year. Over 4 years, that is approximately $720,000, not counting any appreciation in property value." I felt dizzy. What do we do? First, I file a motion to set aside the tax sale based on improper notice. We argue that because you were actively attempting to pay your taxes, and the county failed to properly redirect those payments or notify you at an address where you could actually be reached, you were denied due process. Second, we file a lawsuit against Pinehurst Properties for trespass and unjust enrichment. We demand compensation for their use of your property. How long will this take? Months, possibly years. This will not be quick or easy, but given your military service and the circumstances, I think we have a fighting chance. Are you prepared for a long battle? I thought about those 4 years overseas, the sand and heat and danger, the friends I had lost, the sacrifices I had made. I came home to find civilians had stolen my land while I was serving my country. "I am ready," I said. Richardson nodded. "Then let's go to war." Over the next 2 weeks, Richardson filed the necessary motions and lawsuits. The response from Pinehurst Properties was swift and aggressive. They hired a big firm from Atlanta, the kind with 15 names on the letterhead, and immediately filed motions to dismiss. I spent those weeks documenting everything. I drove out to Oakwood Meadows with my phone and recorded video of all 33 homes. I took pictures of the rental signs, the HOA notices posted on a community board near the entrance, the landscaping, everything. I also started talking to the tenants. Most of them were military families from Fort Benning, which made sense given the location. They were paying between $1,100 and $1,400 per month in rent, depending on the home size. None of them knew the land had been stolen. They all thought they were renting from a legitimate development company. One tenant, a young sergeant named Mike Williams, was particularly helpful. "Man, if what you are saying is true, that is messed up," he said. "We were standing in his driveway on a Saturday afternoon. My lease is with Pinehurst Properties. I have been here for 18 months, never had any issues, but the HOA is crazy strict." "What do you mean?" I asked. "They fine people for everything." Grass too long, wrong color mailbox, parking on the street overnight. My neighbor got fined $200 because her trash can was visible from the street on a non-trash day. It is like living in a prison with really nice houses. This gave me an idea. "Do you still have your lease agreement?" "Yeah, why? Would you be willing to share it with my attorney?" "I want to see exactly what Pinehurst is charging you and what they are claiming as their legal right to rent this property." Mike thought about it for a moment. "Sure, why not? If they are scamming you, they might be scamming us too." Over the next few days, I collected lease agreements from 7 different tenants. Richardson was thrilled when I brought them to his office. "This is excellent," he said, flipping through the documents. "Look at this clause. The lease states that Pinehurst Properties is the legal owner of the property. If we can prove they are not the legal owner because the tax sale was invalid, then these leases are potentially fraudulent." "What does that mean for the tenants?" I asked. "They might have claims against Pinehurst for fraud. More importantly for us, it shows a pattern of Pinehurst knowingly profiting from disputed property. That strengthens our unjust enrichment claim." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late September. I showed up at the Muscogee County Courthouse in my best suit, which felt strange after years of wearing nothing but Army uniforms. Richardson met me on the steps. "Remember, this is just a preliminary hearing on the motion to dismiss," he said. "We are not going to win or lose the case today. We just need to convince the judge that we have enough of a claim to proceed to trial." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and uncomfortable benches. Susan Caldwell was there with 3 attorneys in expensive suits. They looked confident, like they did this sort of thing every day. Judge Patricia Martinez presided. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had a reputation, according to Richardson, for being fair but tough. She reviewed the motions in silence for a few minutes before addressing the courtroom. "I have read both sides' filings," she said. "Mr. Richardson, your argument is that the tax sale should be set aside due to improper notice. The county followed statutory requirements by mailing notice and publishing in the newspaper. Why is that insufficient?" Richardson stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Bennett was actively paying property taxes throughout the period in question. His bank records show automatic payments being made to the Muscogee County Tax Assessor's office. The county changed his parcel number without successfully notifying him and then sold his property when taxes on the new parcel went unpaid. This is effectively a clerical error that resulted in Mr. Bennett losing his property despite his good faith efforts to meet his tax obligations." One of the Pinehurst attorneys, a woman with silver hair and a designer suit, stood up. Your Honor, Jennifer Walsh for the defendants. The county followed all statutory requirements for notice. Mr. Bennett's failure to update his mailing address or monitor his property is his own negligence. The tax sale was conducted properly, and Pinehurst Properties relied on that sale's validity when investing over $3 million in development. Setting aside the sale now would be grossly unfair. Judge Martinez turned to me. Mr. Bennett, where were you during the period when these notices were being sent? Deployed overseas with the United States Army, Your Honor, I said. I was in Kuwait and then Iraq from 2019 to 2023. The judge's expression shifted slightly. And you had set up automatic tax payments before deploying? Yes, Your Honor. I made sure all my obligations were handled before I left. I had no way of knowing the county had changed my parcel number. Your Honor, Walsh interjected, military service, while admirable, does not exempt someone from their legal obligations to maintain current contact information with the county. Counsel, I did not ask for your input, Judge Martinez said sharply. She turned back to Richardson. What about the newspaper publication that is considered legally sufficient notice in Georgia? Your Honor, requiring a service member deployed overseas to read local newspaper legal notices is unrealistic and arguably violates the Service Members Civil Relief Act. Mr. Bennett had no reasonable way of receiving that notice. Judge Martinez nodded slowly. I am inclined to agree that there are significant questions about whether Mr. Bennett received adequate notice under these circumstances. The motion to dismiss is denied. This case will proceed to trial. I am also ordering mediation. Both parties will meet with a mediator within 60 days to attempt to resolve this dispute. Trial is tentatively set for February if mediation fails. I felt a surge of relief. We had cleared the first hurdle. Walsh and the other Pinehurst attorneys looked annoyed but not surprised. This was not over by a long shot. Outside the courthouse, Richardson was cautiously optimistic. The judge gave us a good indication that she thinks you have a legitimate claim. Now we need to prepare for mediation and potentially trial. What happens in mediation? I asked. Both sides sit down with a neutral third party and try to negotiate a settlement. Given the amount of money at stake, Pinehurst might prefer to settle rather than risk a jury trial. Juries tend to be sympathetic to veterans. I do not want a settlement, I said. I want my land back. Richardson put a hand on my shoulder. Marcus, you need to be realistic. Even if we win at trial, getting your land back might not be possible. Those houses are occupied by families. The court is not going to evict dozens of people and demolish millions of dollars in development. What we can get is money, a lot of money. I knew he was right, but it did not make me feel any better. My land, my future, had been stolen. Money was not the same as justice. The mediation was scheduled for November at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building. The mediator was a retired judge named Harold Freeman, a grandfatherly black man with a warm smile and shrewd eyes. Gentlemen, ladies, he said as we all sat around a conference table. I have reviewed the case files. This is a complex situation, but I believe we can find common ground. Let me start by saying that mediation is non-binding. Anything said here cannot be used in court. This is a safe space to explore options. Jennifer Walsh spoke first. Judge Freeman, our position is simple. Pinehurst Properties purchased land at a legal tax auction and developed it in full compliance with all regulations. We have invested over $3 million and created housing for military families. Mr. Bennett's claim is based on his own failure to maintain proper contact information with the county. While we sympathize with his situation, we cannot be held responsible for the consequences of his negligence. Freeman turned to Richardson. Mr. Richardson. My client was serving his country overseas when a bureaucratic error resulted in his property being sold out from under him, despite his active efforts to pay his taxes. He has lost 14 acres of land and 4 years of rental income. Pinehurst has profited enormously from their use of Mr. Bennett's land. At minimum, he is entitled to compensation for that unauthorized use. What kind of compensation are we talking about? Freeman asked. Richardson slid a document across the table. Based on the rental income from 33 homes over 4 years, plus the appreciation in land value, we are seeking $2 million in damages. Walsh laughed. That is absurd, even if Mr. Bennett had a valid claim, which he does not. That number is wildly inflated. Freeman held up a hand. Let's take a break. I am going to speak with each side separately. The mediator met with us in a separate room. Marcus, may I call you Marcus? Yes, sir. I am going to be blunt with you. Your case has merit, but it is far from a sure thing. A judge or jury could easily side with Pinehurst, especially given the legal validity of the tax sale process. Even if you win, collecting a judgment might take years. Pinehurst could appeal, tie this up in court forever. You need to seriously consider what settlement you would accept. I want my land back, I said. Freeman shook his head. That is not going to happen. Those houses exist. There are families living in them. No judge is going to order demolition. But you could walk away from here today with enough money to buy new land, build your dream home, and set yourself up for life. Is not that worth considering? Richardson added, Marcus, I think we could get them up to $750,000, maybe $1 million. That is life-changing money. I felt sick. They were asking me to put a price on the theft of my future, but Freeman and Richardson were right. Dragging this out for years, spending money on legal fees with no guarantee of winning, what was the point? I will settle for $1.5 million and the 6 acres I still own returned to me with clear title and no liens, I said. Freeman nodded. Let me see what I can do. The mediation lasted 6 hours. Freeman went back and forth between rooms, carrying offers and counteroffers. Pinehurst started at $250,000, which was insulting. I refused to budge below $1.5 million. Finally, as the sun was setting, Freeman came back with an offer. Pinehurst will pay $1.2 million. They will also quitclaim the 6 acres back to you with clear title, and they will pay your legal fees to date, approximately $75,000. This is their final offer. If you reject it, we go to trial. I looked at Richardson. He nodded slightly. It was a good offer, better than we might get at trial, but it still felt like letting them get away with theft. I need a night to think about it, I said. Freeman looked disappointed but nodded. I will let them know, but Marcus, think very carefully. This is a good deal, bird in the hand. I barely slept that night. $1.2 million was more money than I had ever imagined having. I could buy new land, build a house, invest for retirement. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 33 beige houses on my property, and I felt rage burning in my chest. The next morning, I called Richardson. I am not taking the deal. Marcus, are you sure? This is a very good offer. I am sure. If we go to trial, what are our actual chances? Richardson was quiet for a moment. Honestly, maybe 60-40 in our favor. The judge seemed sympathetic at the hearing, and your military service helps. But Pinehurst's lawyers are good, and the law on tax sales is generally on their side. It is a gamble. Then we gamble. I did not serve 4 years overseas to come home and roll over for these people. All right, Richardson said, then let's prepare for war. The trial preparation consumed the next 3 months. Richardson filed discovery requests, demanding every document Pinehurst had related to the property purchase and development. We received boxes of files, thousands of pages to review. One document stood out. It was an internal email from Susan Caldwell to the Pinehurst Properties CEO, dated just 2 weeks after the tax auction. The email read, "We acquired the Columbus property for a steal, 20 acres for $18,000. Owner was military, deployed overseas, no one monitoring the property. We should move fast on development before anyone notices." "This is huge," Richardson said when I brought it to his attention. "This shows they knew the property owner was military and deployed. They knew he was not monitoring the property. A jury could interpret this as them taking advantage of a service member." We also discovered that Susan Caldwell had a history. She had been involved in 2 previous property disputes in Alabama, both involving questionable acquisitions of distressed properties. Nothing had been proven illegal, but the pattern was there. In December, we deposed Susan Caldwell. The deposition took place in Richardson's conference room with Walsh and another Pinehurst attorney present. A court reporter recorded everything. Richardson started gently. "Mrs. Caldwell, how did you become aware of the tax auction for Mr. Bennett's property?" "I monitor tax auctions as part of my job," Susan said. She was wearing a conservative business suit, her hair perfectly styled. "It is a common practice in real estate development. Did you do any research into why the property was going to auction?" "I reviewed the public records. The taxes were delinquent. That is all I needed to know." "Did you see that Mr. Bennett was actively paying taxes to the county just under the old parcel number?" "That is not something that would show up in the auction listings." "But if you had seen it, would it have changed your decision to purchase the property?" Walsh interrupted. "Objection, speculation." "This is a deposition, not a trial," Richardson said mildly. "She can answer." Susan shifted in her seat. "I do not know, probably not. The auction was legal." Richardson slid a document across the table. "This is your email to your CEO dated 2 weeks after the auction. Can you read the highlighted portion?" Susan's face tightened as she read. "Owner was military, deployed overseas, no one monitoring the property." "How did you know Mr. Bennett was military and deployed?" "I do not recall." "You do not recall how you knew this information just 2 weeks after the auction, but you definitely knew it." "I must have found out somehow, maybe from the county records." "Military deployment status is not in county property records, Mrs. Caldwell. So how did you know?" Susan glanced at Walsh, who said, "You do not have to answer that." "Actually, she does," Richardson said. "This is relevant to whether Pinehurst knowingly took advantage of a deployed service member." The deposition went on for 3 hours. Susan grew increasingly uncomfortable as Richardson methodically demonstrated that Pinehurst had known about my military service and deployment, and had deliberately rushed the development to establish facts on the ground before I could return and contest the sale. By the time we finished, Richardson was smiling. "That went well," he said after they left. "She basically admitted they knew you were deployed, and that is why they moved so fast." A jury is going to hate that. The trial began on February 10th. The courthouse was busy that Monday morning with multiple cases being heard. We were in the same courtroom as before, with Judge Martinez presiding. Jury selection took a full day. Richardson used our challenges to eliminate anyone who worked in real estate or had strong pro-business leanings. Walsh tried to eliminate veterans and anyone with military family members, but there were so many in Columbus, near Fort Benning, that she could not get rid of them all. We ended up with a jury of 7 women and 5 men, including 2 veterans and 3 people with active duty family members. Opening statements were on Tuesday. Walsh went first, presenting Pinehurst as a responsible development company that had followed all legal procedures and created valuable housing for military families. "This is not a case about right and wrong," she said. "It is a case about whether we follow the law or make exceptions based on sympathy. The law says the tax sale was valid. Everything that followed was legal, Mr. Bennett's unfortunate situation does not change that. Richardson's opening statement was powerful. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine you are serving your country overseas. You are in danger every day. You are sacrificing time with your family, missing birthdays and holidays, doing your duty. And while you are gone, someone steals your land. Not through violence or breaking and entering, but through bureaucratic manipulation and taking advantage of your absence. That is what happened to Marcus Bennett. And when he came home after 4 years of service, he found that the defendants had built an entire neighborhood on his land and were making hundreds of thousands of dollars in profit. This case is about whether we allow that to happen in America. The prosecution of the case took 2 weeks. Richardson called me as the first witness. I testified about buying the property, setting up automatic tax payments, deploying and returning to find my land stolen. Walsh's cross-examination tried to paint me as negligent for not updating my mailing address, but I could see from the jurors' faces that they were sympathetic. We called an expert witness, a real estate attorney who testified that the county's failure to redirect my tax payments or provide adequate notice likely violated my due process rights. We called a forensic accountant who calculated that Pinehurst had collected approximately $840,000 in rental income from the property over 4 years, with projected future earnings of over $200,000 per year. Walsh put Susan Caldwell on the stand. Richardson's cross-examination was devastating. He played excerpts from her deposition, highlighting her admission that she knew I was deployed military. He showed the jury her email about getting the property for a steal and moving fast before anyone notices. Mrs. Caldwell, when you wrote "before anyone notices," who were you referring to? Richardson asked. I meant before other developers noticed the opportunity, Susan said, but her voice lacked conviction. Not before Mr. Bennett noticed that you had stolen his land while he was serving overseas. Objection, Walsh shouted. Sustained, Judge Martinez said. Mr. Richardson, rephrase. Before Mr. Bennett noticed that you had acquired his land. We did not steal anything, Susan insisted. We bought it legally. At a tax auction triggered by a bureaucratic error while the owner was deployed overseas serving his country, correct? The auction was legal, Susan repeated. The jury did not look convinced. Several jurors were looking at Susan with expressions of distaste. Richardson had made his point. Pinehurst's defense was that they had relied in good faith on the validity of the tax sale and had invested millions in development based on that reliance. They called their own expert witnesses, including a title attorney who testified that the tax sale appeared valid on its face and that Pinehurst had done adequate due diligence. The most dramatic moment came when Richardson recalled me to the stand for rebuttal testimony. He asked me to describe what it felt like to come home after 4 years of deployment and see my land covered in houses I never authorized. It felt like betrayal, I said, and my voice cracked slightly. I served my country, I did everything right, I paid my taxes, I followed the rules. And I came home to find that while I was gone, people had taken advantage of my absence to steal my future. That land was supposed to be my retirement, my dream, and they took it. Several jurors were visibly emotional. One woman in the back row was wiping her eyes. Closing arguments were on a Friday. Walsh argued that sympathy could not override the law, that the tax sale was valid, and that Pinehurst had acted in good faith. Richardson argued that justice required compensating me for the unauthorized use of my property, and that allowing Pinehurst to profit from taking advantage of a deployed service member would be unconscionable. Judge Martinez gave the jury their instructions and sent them to deliberate. Richardson and I waited in a small conference room near the courtroom. Hours passed. The jury asked for transcripts of Susan Caldwell's testimony and my testimony. They asked to see the rental income calculations again. It was almost 6 in the evening when the bailiff came to tell us the jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The jury foreman, one of the veterans, stood. In the case of Bennett versus Pinehurst Properties on the claim of invalid tax sale, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Bennett. I felt Richardson grab my arm, squeezing hard. The foreman continued. On the claim of trespass and unauthorized use of property, we find in favor of the plaintiff. On the claim of unjust enrichment, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Walsh's face was pale. Susan Caldwell looked like she might be sick. Judge Martinez addressed the jury. Have you determined damages? Yes, Your Honor. We award the plaintiff $1.8 million in compensatory damages, representing rental income and lost use of property. We also award $500,000 in punitive damages for a total of $2.3 million. The courtroom erupted. I sat there in shock. $2.3 million. We had won, and we had won big. Judge Martinez gavelled for order. The jury's verdict is entered. Mr. Richardson, prepare a proposed final judgment. We will address enforcement and payment schedule at a hearing in 2 weeks. Outside the courthouse, I could barely process what had happened. Richardson was ecstatic. Marcus, that was a tremendous verdict. Punitive damages mean the jury believed Pinehurst acted wrongfully, not just negligently. This is a complete victory. What happens now? I asked. Now we collect. If Pinehurst does not pay voluntarily, we can put liens on their assets, garnish their business accounts, force a sale of properties if necessary. With a judgment this size, they will likely pay. It is cheaper than fighting enforcement. Over the next month, Walsh tried to negotiate a payment plan, but Richardson held firm. The judgment included interest, and every day they delayed cost them more. Finally, in March, Pinehurst Properties agreed to pay the full $2.3 million plus legal fees, another $120,000. The money hit my account on March 28th. I sat in my truck, looking at my phone's banking app, seeing a balance I never imagined having. But it was not about the money, it was about justice. It was about standing up to people who thought they could take advantage of a service member. I used part of the money to buy 50 acres of beautiful land about 30 miles outside Columbus, far from any HOA territory. I hired a builder to construct my dream home. A sprawling ranch-style house with a workshop and room for the family I hope to have someday. The 6 acres I still owned from the original property I kept. The land might have bordered a drainage easement, but it was mine. I had a fence erected around it with a large sign. Private property owner returned from deployment, stay off. The story made local news, then regional news. A Columbus TV station did a feature about the veteran who fought an HOA and won. Other news outlets picked it up. Suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters, from other veterans with property disputes, from lawyers who wanted to use my case as precedent. I also started getting hate mail. Susan Caldwell's friends, people who lived in Oakwood Meadows, even some folks who just hated military members, sent angry letters and emails calling me greedy, accusing me of destroying a nice community, claiming I was playing the veteran card for sympathy. But I also got letters of support. Veterans from around the country wrote to thank me for standing up for service members' rights. Legal groups focused on military issues reached out to ask if I would speak about my experience. One letter came from a Marine who had lost his home to a foreclosure scam while deployed in Afghanistan. "Your case gives me hope," he wrote. In May, the Georgia state legislature introduced a bill they called the Marcus Bennett Act, requiring counties to make extra efforts to notify service members of property tax issues, and creating an automatic extension period for deployed military personnel to contest tax sales. The bill had bipartisan support and was expected to pass. I was invited to testify before the state legislature committee considering the bill. Standing in the Georgia state capitol in Atlanta, telling my story to lawmakers felt surreal. But when the committee chairman, a former Army colonel, shook my hand afterward and said, "You did good, soldier," I felt pride. The Marcus Bennett Act passed in July and was signed into law by the governor. It would not help me, but it might help the next service member who came home to find their property stolen. Meanwhile, Pinehurst Properties was imploding. The judgment had drained their cash reserves. Several investors pulled out. Susan Caldwell was forced to resign as HOA president and from the company entirely. Local media reported she was being investigated for her previous property deals in Alabama. In September, almost a year after the trial, I got a call from Richardson. "Marcus, I thought you should know, Susan Caldwell has been arrested." "For what?" I asked. "Fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and exploitation of a service member under Georgia's new law. Turns out she did not just know you were deployed, she specifically targeted your property because of it." Prosecutors found emails where she discussed looking for properties owned by deployed military, knowing they would not be monitoring tax sales. I felt a cold satisfaction. Will she go to prison? If convicted, probably. They are also investigating Pinehurst's CEO for knowing about the scheme. This could bring down the whole company. Susan Caldwell's trial was in December. I attended but did not have to testify since my case had already been decided. The prosecution presented evidence that Susan had systematically targeted properties owned by deployed service members, acquiring multiple properties through questionable tax sales. My case was just the one where she finally got caught. The jury convicted her on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered restitution to multiple victims. Pinehurst Properties filed for bankruptcy shortly after. The Oakwood Meadows development went into receivership. The homes were sold to a different management company, one that promised fair treatment of tenants and no predatory HOA practices. Many of the military families who had been living there were relieved. Without Susan Caldwell's iron-fisted HOA rules, the community became a more pleasant place to live. As for me, I moved into my new home in late January, almost exactly 2 years after coming home from deployment to find my land stolen. The house was everything I had dreamed of: spacious, comfortable, surrounded by trees and open land. No HOA, no neighbors close enough to complain about my grass length, just peace and privacy. I started a small business using part of the settlement money, a consulting company helping veterans navigate property ownership and legal issues. Having been through the nightmare myself, I understood how overwhelming it could be. I hired 2 employees, both veterans, and we quickly had more clients than we could handle. On Memorial Day, I hosted a barbecue at my new property. Richardson came, along with some of the veterans who had supported me during the legal battle. Mike Williams, the sergeant who had helped me get lease documents, brought his family. We grilled burgers and drank beer and watched the sun set over land that was truly mine. "You did a good thing," Richardson said as we stood on my back deck. "Not just for yourself, but for every service member in Georgia. That law is going to protect a lot of people." "I just wanted my land back," I said. "You got justice instead. That is worth more." I thought about that. He was right. I had not gotten my original land back, but I had gotten something more important: accountability. Susan Caldwell was in prison. Pinehurst Properties was bankrupt. The law had been changed to protect other veterans. And I had a new home, a successful business, and the satisfaction of knowing I had not rolled over when someone tried to take advantage of me. The 6 acres from my original property, I eventually donated to a veterans organization that built a small park there, with a memorial to service members who had fought legal battles after coming home from war. It seemed fitting. That land had been stolen from me, and now it would serve other veterans forever. Sometimes I drive past the Oakwood Meadows development. The sign still says Oakwood Meadows Community, but underneath, someone added a small plaque. Built on land stolen from Army veteran Marcus Bennett, returned through justice. I do not know who added that plaque, but it makes me smile every time I see it. The whole experience taught me something important. Justice is not quick and it is not easy, but it is worth fighting for. I served my country overseas and I came home to fight another battle, one in courtrooms instead of combat zones. Both battles were necessary. Both battles were worth fighting. I sleep well in my new home, on my 50 acres of land that no one can take from me. The nightmare of coming home to find my property stolen is over. Susan Caldwell is in prison where she belongs. Other veterans are protected by the law that bears my name. And I have a future again, built not on stolen land but on justice earned through perseverance. People sometimes ask me if I regret not taking the settlement offer, the $1.2 million that would have ended everything quickly. I tell them no. It was never about the money. It was about proving that you cannot steal from a service member and get away with it. It was about standing up for what is right, no matter how long it takes or how hard it gets. That lesson, more than the money or the land or even the legal victory, is what I carried forward from the whole ordeal. When someone wrongs you, especially when they do it deliberately and callously, you have a choice. Accept it or fight back. I chose to fight and I won. Now, sitting on my deck in the evening, watching deer wander across my property, I feel at peace. The war overseas ended when I came home. The war against the HOA ended with justice served. And my future, the one Susan Caldwell tried to steal, is brighter than ever. The story could have ended differently. I could have come home, seen those 33 houses and given up. I could have accepted that the system had failed me and moved on, but I did not. I fought. And in the end, justice prevailed. Not just for me, but for every veteran who will be protected by the Marcus Bennett Act, for every person who learns from my story that it is worth standing up against injustice, no matter how powerful the opponent seems. The land I bought with the settlement is more than just property. It is a symbol of what you can achieve when you refuse to accept wrong as inevitable. Every tree, every blade of grass, every foot of that 50 acres represents the decision to fight rather than surrender. And when I finally retire someday, when I am old and gray and sitting on this same deck, I will look back on this chapter of my life with pride. Not just because I served my country overseas, but because I served justice when I came home. That is a legacy worth leaving. The final chapter came in March of the following year, when the Georgia Veterans Affairs Office reached out to ask if I would speak at Fort Benning to soldiers preparing for deployment. They wanted me to talk about protecting their assets and interests while overseas. Standing in front of 200 soldiers in uniform, looking at their young faces full of determination and fear and pride, I felt the weight of responsibility. These were my brothers and sisters in arms, about to embark on the same journey I had taken. Before you deploy, lock down everything, I told them. Your property, your finances, your legal affairs. Make sure someone you trust has power of attorney. Update your mailing addresses with every agency. Do not assume anything will be fine just because you set it up once. And if something goes wrong while you are gone, do not let anyone tell you that you should have been there to prevent it. You were serving your country. That matters. After the talk, dozens of soldiers came up to thank me and ask questions. One young private, barely 20 years old, shook my hand and said, "Sir, I am about to deploy to Poland. I own a small condo." What should I do? We spent 20 minutes going through his situation, and I gave him Richardson's contact information. "This lawyer saved my future," I told the kid. "He can help protect yours." That is what it all meant in the end. Not the money, not the revenge, not even the legal victory. It meant protecting the next person, helping the next veteran, making sure what happened to me would not happen to someone else. As I drove away from Fort Benning that day, passing the exit that led to what used to be my property, I felt a sense of completion. The nightmare that began when I returned from deployment had transformed into something meaningful. Justice had been served. Laws had been changed. And somewhere, a young soldier was going to deploy with better protection because of my fight. That was worth every moment of stress, every dollar in legal fees, every sleepless night wondering if I would win. Because in the end, I did not just win for myself. I won for everyone who would come after me, and that is the best victory of all.